We're going to continue learning about Herod the Great, and we're going to finish up his story next week. Herod's life kind of went through phases, and we're still in the first phase right now, the phase where he's gaining power, solidifying his position in the country, his relationship with the people of Israel. He's going to go on to do some pretty impressive stuff, actually, some pretty good things. But we already see now his the trajectory of his life changing in a very negative direction. And we're going to see how that happened. And we've seen some really questionable things in his life already, some positive things as well. But there's a lot of similarities between Herod and David, actually. The way that they came into their kingdoms. They both came to power through civil war. And they both ruled a divided kingdom. A lot of their subjects hated them. A lot of David's subjects hated him and would rather the next in line after Saul take his place. And both David and Herod lived in constant danger and often couldn't trust even those closest to them. This is what David says in Psalm 56. Actually, if somebody's looked that up, would somebody like to read that to us? Psalm 56, 5 through 6. Oh, yeah, that's okay. Anyone got that? I have that here as well.
All day long they twist my words. All their schemes are for my ruin. They conspire they lurk, they watch for my steps, hope to take my life. Because of their wickedness, do not let them don't let them escape in your anger. God, bring the nations down.
Yeah, these people, David knows he's being watched. There are people who are constantly thinking, how can I take David down? How can I change the political situation of this country? And Herod felt that same pressure, that same fear that David felt. What he didn't have that David did was a relationship with God, a real deep relationship with God and a trust in God that could overcome that fear. Herod became a victim of his fear, and yeah, that's mostly what we're going to be looking at this morning. But just in review, Herod was declared king of the Jews by the Roman Senate, which at that time was controlled by Octavian and Mark Antony. They were the two most powerful people, the two most powerful Romans at this time. Didn't get along on everything, but they were getting along at that point well enough. So he was declared king of the Jews. He didn't come to power right away. He had to fight for it. As I said, he fought a 2-year civil war against Hyrcanus's nephew, Hyrcanus II, the high priest. His unpleasant nephew, Antigonus II, tried to be king. During that war, Herod married Mariamne, Hyrcanus's granddaughter, and that gave him a lot of legitimacy in the eyes of the nation. Since he was now related, he married into the ruling line. And he also, Mariamne and her brother, actually, both of them, were very good-looking people. They were famous for it. Very attractive, very popular. Herod loved Mariamne. The feeling wasn't necessarily the same on from her side. She didn't appreciate the fact that she was married to the person who had essentially taken the power from her family. She saw herself as a princess, as a royal person, Herod as a non-royal who was coming in and receiving authority from Rome, authority that wasn't his by right. So, yeah, Herod's relationship with the Hasmonean family and even with his own wife was okay, but just okay. It wasn't really close. It wasn't really positive as he would have liked it to be. But yeah, at least on his side, he cared very, very deeply about Mariamne and married her during that civil war. But after capturing Jerusalem, you'll remember Herod had to personally pay the governor of Syria and his soldiers to stop plundering the city and killing people. So Antigonus, the usurper, was executed on Herod's request by Mark Antony at Antioch, and that's where we left off last time. So Herod is now sole ruler of the country, legitimized by Rome, specifically by Mark Antony. Technically, Herod could do whatever he wanted. He was free. He had an alliance with Rome, but they saw him as ruler of the country. Yeah? Yes, this is Mark Antony right here. Very good. So, yeah, Mark Antony, in reality, since he's the one who gave Herod power, he was a bit of a threat to Herod. They were on good terms. They were friends. But if anybody could take Herod out of power just by saying the word, it would be this guy. So, but fortunately for Herod, they were on very good terms. The people who were not on good terms were Antony and Octavian. Octavian was Caesar's heir, Julius Caesar's heir, that he had chosen. Antony didn't necessarily like that decision, didn't necessarily like Octavian himself very much. And that relationship had grown very sour by this point. And the reasons for that are very, very complicated. There were a lot of reasons involved, but the most obvious reason is that they were both very powerful men who just didn't trust each other. And kind of like Julius Caesar and Pompey, even though they had nothing against each other personally, they were always vying for power and knew that if the other person got more power than them, their position and their life would be in jeopardy. So Antony and Octavian drifted apart in a big way. But they were kind of reconciled. Actually, Antony married Octavia, who was Octavian's sister. So they became brother-in-laws through this marriage. Yeah. Because it's just his, that's all that the statue shows. It's not part of a bigger statue. It's just a statue of his head. So yeah, it's not wearing anything for that reason. It doesn't need to. But, yeah. Despite the fact that Mark Antony was married to Octavian's sister, he did have an ongoing affair with Cleopatra VII, and that had started even before that marriage. So remember, Julius Caesar and Cleopatra had a thing, and after Julius Caesar interfered in Egypt, got power for Cleopatra, for a while, Cleopatra was living in Rome with her son, Ptolemy the 15th, Caesar, nicknamed Caesarion, which means Little Caesar. No, yeah, no relation with the pizza company, I believe. But yeah, Caesarion was Cleopatra's son. Yes, by Julius Caesar. So they had a relationship. She was in Rome, not officially married, but after Julius Caesar's death, she went back to Egypt. But she also developed a relationship now with Mark Antony. And of course, they weren't married either, but it's kind of an open thing. Everybody knew about it. And yeah, that did not help his relationship with Octavian at all. The fact that he was having an affair and his sister felt jealous. So, but while Mark Antony was in Antioch, where we left him last week, he received a visit from Cleopatra, and she brought along Antony's 3-year-old son and daughter so that he could meet them for the first time, actually. So, yeah, their affair had been going on for a while at that point, and she was pregnant again by the time she left for Egypt. But while she was there, she also supplied Antony with the soldiers and the funding he needed to strike back against the Parthians. Remember, the Parthians had been getting in Roman business. They had tried to take over Syria and Judea. Mark Antony was going to retaliate. He was going to do more than that. He was going to conquer them once and for all, make up for the terrible defeat that Crassus suffered. Remember, Crassus tried to do that and died trying. But Mark Antony was not successful. In fact, he ended up losing more men than Crassus had. So the Parthians and the Romans kind of had a stalemate going on. When the Parthians tried to invade Roman territory, they couldn't win. When the Romans tried to invade Parthian territory, they couldn't win. They were enemies, but they had to kind of be content to remain so, to tolerate each other. So Mark Antony couldn't defeat the Parthians either. But after his defeat, he decided not to return to Rome. He sailed to Egypt instead and began living there full time with Cleopatra. Yeah, and that's where he'll be for most of the story today. So this is from the Jewish Antiquities by Josephus. And this is kind of the beginning of Herod's trouble right here. And it began with his mother-in-law, Alexandra, the daughter of Hyrcanus. So this is Alexandra II. Remember, Hyrcanus's mother was queen of Judea. She was the best Hasmonean ruler there was, probably. And so Hyrcanus he named his daughter after his mother. So this is Hyrcanus's daughter, Mariamne's mother, Alexandra II, or at least she would have been the second if she had ever ruled. But it says Alexandra, the daughter of Hyrcanus, had a very handsome son called Aristobulus, and a beautiful daughter, Mariamne, who was married to Herod. So Aristobulus and Mariamne, brother and sister, both very pretty people. Alexandra was indignant that Herod had bestowed the high priesthood on an obscure priest from Babylon named Ananias. Ananias? Yeah. Rather than on Aristobulus. Accordingly, she wrote to Cleopatra to ask for her intercession with Antony in order to gain the high priesthood for her son. So remember, Hyrcanus himself, he's still alive, but he can't be high priest right now because his ears have been mutilated. His body has been disfigured, and that disqualifies him from serving as high priest. Ananelus, however you say that, the guy that Herod put in charge, was part of a priestly Jewish family that had returned very late from the Babylonian exile. So they hadn't even been in Israel very long. But he also happened to be a personal friend of Herod. And there are very good reasons why Herod would not want a Hasmonean to be high priest. Very likely, when his own sons were old enough, he would have tried to make them high priest as well as king, because they did have Hasmonean blood. But a Hasmonean priest, for the last 100 years, remember, the priest has been the king. That's how the people saw it. So it could potentially be a threat to his rule. Yeah. The high priest is just the priest that was in charge of all the other priests. Yeah. Yeah, the leader of the priests. But so Alexandra's plan, the way that she saw things and how she got around Herod, was I, as a woman on good terms with Cleopatra, I can talk to Cleopatra. Cleopatra can talk to Antony, and Antony's going to do everything that Cleopatra says, and Herod's going to do everything that Antony says. So that's the kind of chain of command here: Alexandra, Cleopatra, Antony, Herod. That's how I get my way. But yeah, this didn't quite work out, this plan. While Antony was delaying in granting this request, his friend Delius came into Judea on some business. So this guy knows Antony personally. And he gets in touch with Alexandra, and he persuaded Alexandra to send Antony pictures of both Aristobulus and Mariamne. For he told her that when Antony saw them, he would deny her nothing that she asked. Remember, they're very attractive people. And Antony, in case you haven't figured out, isn't a great moral person either. When Antony had received the portraits, he considered sending for the girl, Mariamne. That was his first thought, but he refrained from doing so, since Cleopatra would have reproached him for taking Herod's wife. Yeah, she's married to Herod. That would be crossing over a moral boundary, at least for Cleopatra. Okay, so you get the idea. They had a very open relationship, but yeah, that would be crossing a line. Instead, because apparently this would have been okay, he sent for the young man Aristobulus instead, in the most decent manner he could. So his response wasn't, yes, I'm going to support him for high priest. It was, why don't you come down to Egypt? And when Antony's letter was brought to Herod, Herod did not think it safe to send a young man as handsome as Aristobulus, who was 16 years old at that time, to a man like Antony, a leading man among the Romans who openly indulged himself in such pleasures as his power allowed. Herod was less naive than his mother-in-law about the things that went on in Greco-Roman society and the character of Antony himself. He therefore wrote back that Aristobulus was such a beloved and important figure to the Jews that they would revolt if he were sent out of the country. So sorry, we can't send him. Yes, Obi.
To get to Rome in a car.
In a car? Oh, from here? You couldn't do it. You'd have to drive across the Arctic somehow. Yeah, I don't think it'd work. You would have to take a boat or a plane. But I'm not sure how long it would take exactly. Yeah, possibly. All right. So after this incident, Herod began having Alexandra watched constantly, doesn't trust her anymore, to the point that she felt like a prisoner. And she eventually tried to have herself and her son smuggled out of the palace in coffins and brought to Egypt. But Herod found out and put a stop to it. Most likely, her plot was to have Cleopatra back Aristobulus as king and high priest and invade Judea, take the kingdom away from Herod. That would have made her overjoyed. That's really what she wanted, was for her son to inherit the kingdom. And Herod knows this, and it's why he doesn't trust her. But and he also doesn't trust or particularly like Cleopatra as well. Cleopatra wanted Israel. The Ptolemy family used to control that area, and she wants to restore the Ptolemaic kingdom to its former glory. She wants domain again over Judea and Syria. But not just Alexandra, but Mariamne, his wife, were very persistent in asking for Aristobulus to be made high priest. And finally, Herod gave in to pressure and appointed Aristobulus as Aristobulus III as the high priest at the age of 17. Okay. Against his better judgment. When the people saw Aristobulus officiating at the Feast of Booths that year, Herod's fears became a reality. They fell in love with him. He was young, he was tall, he was incredibly handsome, as we've said, and very Hasmonean. You could look at him and see his father and his grandfather and his great-grandfather. It felt like the Hasmoneans were coming back, that it was going to be like the old days. And remember, everybody alive at this time can't remember a time when the high priest was not also the king until Herod. That has been the case. So popular opinion went very, very much against Herod and for Aristobulus. People started talking about overthrowing Herod, even if Aristobulus himself didn't want it. Herod's kingdom was being threatened just by Aristobulus being in this position, which did put Herod in a very uncomfortable kind of dilemma. And yeah, he could have responded to the situation in a much more positive way than he did. But he thought to himself, I need to get rid of my brother-in-law. I have to get rid of Aristobulus somehow. And he couldn't do this openly. He couldn't either remove him from his position that he had already put him in, or in any kind of open way without jeopardizing his own position and possibly his life. He knows how much the people love Aristobulus. Well, not very long after this, on one hot day when Alexandra, his mother-in-law, was hosting the king and his attendants at Jericho. So having kind of a party there at their, Oh, we'll find out. That's what I'm talking about, is what the picture is. Yeah. So it was a hot day. Herod and his men, not Herod himself, but several of his men decided to go swimming in the fish ponds that were around that place in a very carefree and friendly, hey, why don't you go join in the fun kind of way. Herod convinced Aristobulus to go with them. And once he was in the water, there was a bit of roughhousing that happened. Herod's men kind of surrounded Aristobulus. By the time they were done, Aristobulus was still in the pool. Everybody else got out. He was, yeah. They checked on him, pulled him out. He was dead. He had drowned. He had been held underwater until he had suffocated. And it looked like an accident. It was made to look like an accident. It almost certainly was not. Herod cried real tears as far as anybody could tell. People didn't believe it, though. It was, yeah, popular opinion was very sure that Herod had had Aristobulus murdered. And that is certainly what Alexandra, his mother-in-law, believed. And when this sad accident, Josephus says, was told to the women, their sorrow was immoderate. The people of Jerusalem grieved also, everyone feeling as if a member of their own family had died. But Alexandra was more deeply affected than any of them. She knew that Aristobulus had been murdered, but was afraid of what might follow if she spoke out against Herod. She often considered killing herself, but she resisted the impulse in hopes that she might live long enough to avenge her son. So Alexandra wrote an account of the murder and sent it to Cleopatra, who had shown a willingness to help her in the past. Cleopatra went in turn to Antony and urged him to punish Herod, since it was wrong for a man who had no natural right to his kingdom to be guilty of such horrid crimes against those who were of royal blood. This is something that Cleopatra could care about. This is the exact sort of thing that would make her angry. She is from a very long royal line. She cares about legitimacy, and that is one of her big reasons for disliking Herod himself. He is not of royal blood and should have no right to execute people who are. Antony listened to her, and when he came to Laodicea, he sent and commanded Herod to come and make a defense for what he had done to Aristobulus. Now, secretly, when he left, Herod knew that he might not be coming back, that things could go sour, he might be executed because of this. Oh, there's a shark thing in the water? I think that's just a fish. Yeah.
That's a big fish.
Just a big fish. I don't think it's dangerous. No. But because Herod knew he might not be coming back, he left instructions that if he were to die, a few other people, but also Mariamne, was to be killed. This is jealousy talking. He can't bear the thought of her marrying someone else. He loved her, but it was a very selfish kind of love. And she found out about this afterwards. It did not help their relationship, whatever. She was very upset about this, obviously. But when Herod came to Antony, he brought many presents with him from Jerusalem. And these gifts, combined with Herod's arguments, proved more powerful than Cleopatra's persuasions. So, Antony, as somebody who is not of a long royal line himself, somebody who is a bit of an opportunist like Herod, is more willing to take his side, especially as the person who put Herod in power in the first place, as somebody who wants the kind of power for himself that Herod is demonstrating. Okay, he agreed with Herod that he should not be required to give an account of how he managed his government. It's not that Herod was declared guilty or innocent, it was just that Alexandra and Cleopatra had no business to interfere with what Herod and Antony did. That was the consensus that they came to. He said those who had given him his authority should permit him to make use of it, to do what he liked. And he also sent a message to Cleopatra saying that it would be best for her not to meddle in Herod's affairs. So, Herod got away with this scot-free, returned to Judea. Antony returned to Egypt. And as Antony and Cleopatra continued to rule together in Egypt, their relationship with Rome became more and more strained. Of course, because of Octavian's sister, who was being neglected because of this relationship, and other reasons as well. There was a propaganda war that started going on. Antony slandering Octavian, calling Antony, guilty of all sorts of immorality, which was probably true. Their falling out became more and more serious until finally, at the end of 33 BC, Antony, it was right after he had won a victory up north of Syria. He returned to Egypt. He had kind of his own version of a Roman triumph, that parade that they would have. And at the end of that ceremony, he officially announced that he was cutting all ties with Octavian, and that Caesarion, Cleopatra's son by Julius Caesar, was Julius Caesar's rightful heir, his true heir. In spite of what Julius Caesar said, he was going to support Caesarion. And Octavian wasn't related to Caesar nearly as directly. He was the grandson of Caesar's sister. So by blood, Caesarion was a lot more direct, had a lot more legitimacy, even though Julius Caesar and Cleopatra were not married. That was the problem there. But Antony planned to make Alexandria the new capital of the Roman world, and started even forming his own Roman Senate in defiance of the Senate in Rome. So things got pretty serious between him and Octavian, which led to yet another Roman civil war. Yes.
It was gas station.
You would hit water both ways. There's the Atlantic on one side and the Pacific on the other side. So either way, you would have to cross an ocean. So Antony and Octavian fought a war with each other. Not a super long war, but hostilities came to a head in a big way at the Battle of Actium in 31 BC. And in this battle, Antony and Cleopatra had many more ships and men than Octavian, but Octavian's forces were more experienced and unified. And after suffering enormous losses, Antony and Cleopatra fled the battle and returned to Egypt. Now, Herod himself would have been at this battle. He was going to be at this battle. But instead, he was sent to invade Nabatea. Antony and Cleopatra asked him to do that. Cleopatra's plan was to weaken both Judea and Nabatea because she wanted to take those over, and also to weaken Antony's relationship with Herod all at the same time. So it didn't work that way. Herod actually had a great victory. He increased in power because of that little war he fought, and he wasn't part of this defeat, which would have gone very badly for him. So his rivalry with Cleopatra really worked in his favor at this point. But the fact that Mark Antony had lost this battle was not in Herod's favor whatsoever, since he had been so close to Mark Antony. He had been on Mark Antony's side. And the news of Antony's defeat came as a very severe blow to Herod and his supporters. So Herod is summoned away from Jerusalem yet again, this time to face Octavian. And fearful for his kingdom and his life, Herod quickly started making preparations to go meet Octavian in person, see if he could work something out with him, some kind of understanding. And it was a journey, again, from which he knew he might not return. So before he left, he did a few things. He, first of all, had Hyrcanus II, his grandfather-in-law, executed on a charge of treason. He saw Hyrcanus as his last legitimate rival for the throne, even though Hyrcanus probably at this point in his life had no such desire. Just to be sure, Herod had him killed. Yes, Obi. Wanted. What's that? Mm.
Like, you said Marvin to be on the throne.
Oh, I can't remember. But, yep, Hyrcanus was killed by Herod at this time, which also did not help his relationship with his wife and with his mother-in-law. But before he left, he also left instructions again that if he were killed, that the kingdom should pass to his brother Pheroras, who was still alive, his little brother, and then after him to the sons of Mariamne, and also that if he were to die, Mariamne was to be killed, and Alexandra. So Alexandra because he didn't trust Alexandra, and Mariamne because he couldn't bear the thought of her marrying someone else. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead. So Herod came before Octavian on the island of Rhodes, and it was a very, very important and delicate political situation, a very important and significant moment in Herod's life and career. What Herod did, he removed his crown when he went in to see Octavian. He didn't wear that, but he kept all of his other ornaments and finery and approached with an air of confidence. And he began by stating openly that he was and always had been completely loyal to Mark Antony, and that he would have done even more to support his friend and benefactor, that he should have been at the Battle of Actium, but also that he bore Octavian no ill will, nothing personal about this. In fact, he had counseled Antony to reconcile with Octavian and to kill Cleopatra. But he told Octavian, basically, if you win this war and become my new lord and benefactor, then I will show you the same loyalty and friendship that I showed to Mark Antony. And Octavian respected that, Herod's courage and honesty. He found it refreshing. So he actually confirmed Herod as king of Judea. And later, after he had won the war, because he did win the war, he added to Herod's domain. He made it even bigger by giving him control of several coastal cities. And by the way, from this point on, we're going to stop calling this guy Octavian and start calling him the name that he chose for himself, which is Augustus. Caesar Augustus, the first emperor of Rome. Julius Caesar had acted like an emperor, but Augustus was the first official member of that line. So Augustus continued into Egypt and defeated the remainder of Antony's army. After this defeat, Antony heard a false report that Cleopatra had killed herself. This is Mark Antony. who died. Yeah, so Antony heard a false report that Cleopatra had committed suicide, and in response, he killed himself with a dagger, kind of a Romeo and Juliet situation. Not long afterwards, Cleopatra did kill herself with the poison of an asp, the poison of a snake, to prevent Augustus from taking her captive. So Antony and Cleopatra avoided being paraded in a triumph as prisoners of war by committing suicide. But Cleopatra's son, Caesarion, became pharaoh when she died at the age of 16. And Caesarion, little Caesar, ruled for 18 days before Augustus had him executed. Caesarion was the last pharaoh that Egypt ever had. They have not had one since. Yes, Obi? Yeah, a little bit. Well, he was lying down, so it's hard to tell, but yep. So meanwhile, Herod returned home and went straight to Mariamne with news of his success. To his surprise, she greeted him with open hostility. While he had been gone, Mariamne had gained the trust and sympathy of the guy Herod had left in charge of her, a man named Joseph. And Joseph had told her about the instructions that Herod had left to kill her if he didn't return, as a way of convincing her, ironically, of how much Herod loved her. She was all like, Herod doesn't care about me. He was like, of course he does. In fact, he loves you so much, he told me to kill you if he didn't return safely. And yeah. Mariamne called Herod a murderer, stopped showing him any affection at all, which wounded him deeply, stopped even pretending to like him in any way. And Herod's own mother and sister, who had never liked Mariamne, at this same time began telling him unpleasant stories about her, claiming that she had been unfaithful to him while he was gone. And finally, they convinced Herod that Mariamne was in a plot to poison him. Yeah.
Who sort of got divorced, look like.
Well, a few people in this story have sort of got divorced, but yeah, Herod had another wife before he married Mariamne. But yeah, Mark Antony is dead. What's that? Well, in the picture, he's the guy in the red robe. And the woman in the golden handcuffs is Mariamne. See, so Mariamne was, Herod became convinced, involved in a plot against his life. And at Mariamne's trial, her own mother, Alexandra, was so terrified of Herod that out of fear for her own life, she testified against her daughter. She agreed with those who said that Mariamne was plotting against Herod and contradicted that later, but Herod was convinced and enraged, and heartbroken, he sentenced Mariamne to death. But once Mariamne was dead, and this is in the words of Josephus here again, the king's affections for her were kindled even more strongly than before. His love had always been youthful and passionate, but it seized him so strongly now that it seemed God was punishing him for taking her life. For he would frequently call for her and frequently lament for her in a most indecent manner. He began wandering into desert places under the pretense of going hunting and bitterly afflicting himself. Soon he became feverish and developed an incurable pain in the back of his head. Now Alexandra lived at this time at Jerusalem. When she heard of the condition Herod was in, she tried to get possession of the fortified areas of the city and the temple, claiming she wished to protect Herod's legacy if he should happen to die, because he wasn't taking care of himself. When messengers told Herod what Alexandra was doing, he immediately gave orders to have her slain. Herod remained uneasy and greatly afflicted, both in mind and body. Slain means killed. So his mother-in-law as well. Pretty much every Hasmonean is dying because of Herod in some way. But Herod remained uneasy and greatly afflicted in both mind and body. He was readier than ever upon all occasions to inflict punishment upon those who fell under his hand, even his closest friends. Yeah, and even his sons later on, we're going to find. But yeah, Herod could be cruel, and especially after this point, he became a different sort of ruler in a lot of ways. But he wasn't the kind of man who was cruel because he was sadistic, because he enjoyed watching other people suffer. He was cruel because he was afraid. He became paranoid about plots against him. And were all of his fears unjustified? They weren't. People really did plot against him. People really did want him to fail or to die. But could he have responded to them differently? He could have responded to them in the way that David did. And again, David went through a lot of similar things, a lot of similar situations regarding people plotting against his life, even people very close to him, even his own sons. But his relationship with God and his faith in God allowed him to come through it in a very different way, as a very different man. In Psalm 27, 1 through 3, and I'll just read these, David says, Yahweh is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? He lived a long time before this. But yeah, he went through a lot of the same kind of things that Herod did. He said, Yahweh is the strong defense of my life. Whom shall I dread? When evildoers come upon me to devour my flesh, my adversaries and my enemies, they stumbled and fell. Though a host encamp against me, my heart will not fear. Though war arise against me, in this I trust. It is not our situation that makes us who we are. It is our relationship with God. And we can be bent any way, usually in a very negative way, by the situations we find ourselves in life. But it is He who causes all things to work together for our good, when He is our trust, when He is our pursuit. And unfortunately for Herod, he was not. Any questions about all of that? Yes, Obi.
They have my hand.
Mm-hmm. Oh, we're going to find out about that later. He thought his sons were trying to kill him. And maybe one or two of them were. It's hard to say this late in the game, but we are right at the end of our time, so let's go ahead and pray. Father, thank you for the confidence that we can have in you, that however bad our situations get, you are our constant. Help us to trust in you, to rely on you in every situation, and to allow you to mold us into the people you want us to be. Give us a good time this morning as we worship you, as we learn from your word. Please change us and grow us according to your will. In Jesus' name, amen.